Hi, I'm Jody Cohen, your host, and I'm so excited to be joined by my new friend, Sterling Cooley, who probably knows more about the vagus nerve than I do. Sterling is the founder and CEO of Berkeley Ultrasound, a biomedical engineering firm that is researching how the vagus nerve can be modulated using high-frequency pulsed ultrasound. He also runs the world's largest vagus nerve stimulation group on Facebook and can be found engaging, educating, and inspiring a highly educated audience like you guys regularly. Welcome, Sterling.
Thank you for having me, Jody. It's really an honor to get to speak to you finally.
I know.
Yeah.
And I really want to hear, can you share kind of how you fell down this rabbit hole, how you started researching the vagus nerve and vagus nerve stimulation?
Yeah, it's fascinating. You were part of that journey actually, so that's why it's kind of cool that you reached out to me about this. I remember after I first used I used a technique that was really powerful that actually gave me kind of an out-of-body experience, honestly. And it was because I was stimulating the vagus nerve. And then that was when I was like, there's something more to this nerve than I've thought. And it wasn't that I hadn't encountered the vagus nerve many years before. I had. So back in 2016, after having developed ultrasound technology for many years, we had access to, through my company, many different parameters where you could stimulate different nerves with different frequencies and different intensities and do like really cool stuff. I mean, we're talking like the difference between like a Tibetan singing bowl versus like a harp, the amounts of stimulation.
Oh, you were playing with frequency.
Yeah,
I
frequency
see.
with ultrasound. So you can program it with a computer. Like anybody could program this thing. It's really cool. Make like the most complicated frequencies you want. So combine everything.
Can you explain to people like how different frequency, can you land on frequency for a second for listeners who might not know what that is?
Yeah, totally. So the frequency would basically be the time between pulses of when we're dealing with ultrasound. It's all just sound, right? So it's all just waves. So
it's energy waves.
It's energy waves, yeah. And so it's essentially vibration in physical matter. And the way that a sound wave looks like in physical matter is it kind of like moves like this, like an accordion or like an inchworm or a caterpillar. And so it pushes and expands and contracts and it moves through tissue, through either air, through water, or human tissue. That's really my domain, is how do we get ultrasound into the human body? So when you're talking about higher frequency stuff, you're now dealing with like on the cellular level, whereas like a big wave that you can hear, like a sonic boom, you've seen some of these sonic booms that happen where you can see the wave moving across the ground. It's like pushing it, kicking up dirt. When you're dealing with really high frequency stuff, it's like moving the walls of a cell. Like it's actually vibrating on the cellular level. So it's like molecules vibrating. So with ultrasound, it's like anywhere between like 1 million times per second up to, in some cases, 5 to maybe 12 million times per second. And so the higher the frequency, the smaller the gap is between these pulses. So you can actually target really, really, really small parts of the body with this stuff. So anyway, that's what that's what we're able to do with ultrasound specifically. Now in 2016, what was happening was that we were having a house party up in Napa, and we had a professor, a really smart, I think is a woman who teaches philosophy up there. Really, really lovely lady. And my friend, a PhD, he was like, let's try the ultrasound on the vagus nerve. And this is in 2016, the summer of 2016. And I was like, okay, cool. So we took the probe and we actually put it on the ear where you can stimulate it. Yeah, right on on the concha. And I was unfamiliar with the kind of anatomy at that time. It was mostly, we're like dealing with like, how do we stimulate through the skull? That's like our main technical hurdle. Then he's like, let's do it on the ear. And so this woman did it, and we did this profile where it was like, it was like pulsing ultrasound. And she had this really incredible look on her face. Like she was like having a very sensual experience with this. And I was like, I don't understand. This is weird. Like, was like, can I try? And I did it, and I didn't feel much. It was like a little kind of like a tickle,
Yeah.
a little bit of a tickle kind of thing. And it wasn't unpleasant, but I was like, okay. And then she tried it again, and she was just like, oh, like, and she was having this interesting experience right in front of us. And we were like, okay, we need to go to lunch now. Like, let's go. I was trying to like be impatient, and we had a hard time pulling it off of her ear, like just being like, okay, we got to go. And it says so much more about me than anything else, that moment where a woman had a very like almost orgasmic experience with ultrasound on her vagus nerve went way over my head. And it still took me about another year to actually explore more about the vagus nerve. And it was because I had a completely different experience with it.
Right. And for people who aren't tracking, the vagus nerve is pretty much like rebooting to factory settings. It innervates every organ in the system, including the genitals. So it does contribute to sexual orgasm.
Yeah, exactly. And we know this because of women who are paraplegic, who actually would have their spinal cord severed at some level in the body, but are still able to orgasm because of that, because the vagus nerve is actually connected down there. I actually told a woman like who is paraplegic, and she's like, "Oh my God, that's amazing news! I'm going to tell my husband." So
yeah, and it can help actually with spinal injuries, or because it's the main kind of information highway and signal that if you activate that, it improves communication throughout the body.
Yeah, definitely. So it's a wild first encounter really with stimulating the vagus nerve with ultrasound in 2016. And then it still took me about a year to really like fully realize in my own mind the potential. And what happened was that I was doing Wim Hof breathing. So like really good Wim Hof breathing is where you like take deep breaths. Breath work is huge when it comes to vagus nerve stimulation.
Right.
Valsalva squeezing, especially when you're take a deep breath in, and then you squeeze, you hold the air in, you retain the air, and then you use your chest, your stomach muscles, your pectoral muscles, and you squeeze with your core, kind of like you're doing crunches, but like not actually moving, just holding. And it squeezes the diaphragmatic muscle in your core. And what it does is it's pinching a part of the vagus nerve. It's like a nice squishy hug. It's not like a pinch or anything, but it's definitely puts pressure on it. And what that does is it allows your vagus nerve to, I believe, it's like taking a long string if you play a guitar or an instrument, and you know that pinching the string will increase the frequency. So it vibrates faster. So
that's what certain yoga poses do also.
Yeah, exactly. Like the cat, cow, this kind of thing, and the cobra pose and the child's pose. So yeah, yoga is huge for vagus nerve stimulation for sure.
Yeah.
So the Valsalva squeeze through breath work, that does it. And so in 2017, I was experimenting with this, and I had this idea. What if I put ultrasound on my neck to stimulate the vagus nerve? Right?
So you were layering. Brilliant.
I was layering. I was like, because I know that that's definitely helpful, because I've layered, there's like the chi machine where you can like have your whole body vibrating at a certain frequency, and then you can breathe at a certain rate. And I like jumping on a trampoline. I see everything as just like frequencies all combined, binaural beats. It's all very interrelated. So I put the ultrasound on, and as I was doing the Valsalva squeeze, the really hardcore squeeze, something more than what normally happened. And I started going into this altered state very, very rapidly, very fast. And while my eyes were closed, I could start to see sort of a bright light in front of me. And it felt like I was almost in this room of sorts, like I describe it as like if I were waking up from the simulation. Yeah. And I could see into the room that you're actually stored in while we're, processing here in our minds. And it was this incredible sense of freedom. It was this incredible sense of like reconnecting with my body even. And it really has led me to believe that there's so much more to this nerve, because it was like my subconscious was speaking to me in such a clear way that I had never had before. I've meditated for years. I've, done some, I guess, psychonaut exploration
Yeah.
Different things. So you
Yeah.
can kind of explore consciousness that way a little bit better. But this was so clear. It was like I could hear my body speaking. Really,
No,
like
that's
words.
interesting because I've been playing with the pineal gland is kind of another. The experience you're talking about usually comes from the pineal gland, and I know that the parasympathetic, the vagus nerve and the parasympathetic state, and that rhythm is correlated with the circadian rhythms. And I wonder if you got yourself in such a kind of harmonized state that you actually activated the pineal gland too.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible. It was very much more than just a typical Valsalva squeeze. It was
Yeah.
more than just ultrasound. It was the combination of them together was something really profound. And it was like a wake-up call for me, too. It felt like a bit of a near-death experience, like a bit of an out-of-body.
Well, that's the pineal gland releases that chemical when you're, that's exactly what that is.
Yeah, so it was very powerful. And so it took that happening for me to go, okay, there's something about this nerve that is really profound that I've not given it credit for.
Yes.
So that really began the journey of switching from my whole host of knowledge of neurons, ultrasound, stimulating the brain and the body, and switching it now into just the vagus nerve, like just all the focus. And there's a lot of benefits in that because when you're speaking about stimulating the brain, there's just so much density that there's technical challenges that you have to overcome. But when it comes to the vagus nerve, it's so simply like right here that you can completely access it.
Yeah, and it's most accessible right here, which makes it really nice.
Exactly. Yeah. So, that was my first foray into the power, the majesty of this nerve. And
you, okay.
I haven't looked back ever since.
Well, you said something in your interview intake form. Our ancestors clearly knew about the vagus nerve, and we're just now rediscovering how powerful and important this nerve is. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. So growing up, I was always reading about just, I don't know, ancient cultures and history. And I became very obsessed with Egyptian culture and hieroglyphs and what did they know and why were they so obsessed with taking time away from farming and scrawling things on the walls. And now, right? Like they're like, it's a lot of resources to be like, let's just start, carving into rock. So it's really fascinating. And one of the things that always really presented to me was the Eye of Horus. So that image, the Eye of Horus, is such a classical Egyptian thing. And so upon looking into it, it's not necessarily just an eye. What it really represents is the five senses, actually. So part of it is about the five senses. And so there's a curve that comes off the very bottom. There's a really long curve. Maybe you can put it up on the screen or whatever, but there's a very long curve. I have a blog post about this too, so people can look at this later. You can put this in the description and you'll see everything I'm talking about. But there's this long curve that comes off of it and it twirls at the end. Now that is the sense of thought, okay? And when I had that experience with the ultrasound, and it was like I could literally hear my body thinking and speaking clearly, like words. Like it was like, think of all the dreams you had that you're not putting yourself towards. And
you broke through a frequency fence.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, okay, like this is the subconscious mind is speaking to me now. Yeah. I've activated that. I've like tuned the two frequencies, the crystals of my brain and my body, like two walkie-talkies. Now they're speaking very clearly. So I was like, okay, I think the Egyptians were onto something. So I looked into this more, and it turns out that the anatomy of the way that the vagus nerve enters the skull is similar to the anatomy of the vagus nerve in terms of how, the two are very similar.
It's a map.
The anatomical. Yeah, it's like a map that they were drawing. And people would say, oh, well, no, there's only one Eye of Horus and there's two holes. But there's not. There's actually two eyes. There's the Eye of Horus and the Eye of Ra, the good and the bad, the light and the dark. And people often correspond like the left side of your vagus nerve is different than the right side. So they have different kind of things. And
could you elaborate on that?
Yeah. People? So like in Chinese culture, there's this story. It's fascinating. I was in Beijing and I was at the Forbidden City and I was doing research on this actually. And a friend of mine helped me find a children's book to explain this story really well. And it's the story of the dragon that has to save the village. It's the fire dragon. and it has to swim to the very dark depths of the ocean to steal a golden ball of light, an egg, and take it back to the surface. But in terms of taking it out of the water, it has to fight the water dragon. And so there's this tale, this myth of these two interweaving dragons that are both reaching up towards the sky from the depths of the water towards a golden orb, right? And so if you look at all the anatomical references to the pineal gland, it's usually represented as a golden ball of light or an acorn, but it's usually this like haloed, like tendrilled item that's very valued by these two dragons. And so the vagus nerve is, if you look at the anatomy, it's like this long dragon that stretches through your body. It's this one nerve, and it enters into a hole. There's a lot of metaphor that is very heavily layered if you really read into it a little bit more. And so I think that the Egyptians especially knew the anatomy of this nerve. It was very important to them, and they were always looking for different ways to access it. And there's even some evidence showing that they understood the power of frequency and music in terms of activating these things.
Well, and they used a lot of blue, and they played with blue lotus essential oil. Yeah, they really did know what they were doing.
Definitely. Yeah. And so it's like, what would you want to pass on to your descendants? Would it be just like cool pictures, or would it be like medical anatomy? Here's how you actually heal somebody if they get sick, right? Yeah. So I think that's probably, they're like, this is really fascinating knowledge.
Yes.
So I think that's part of the idea that the vagus nerve is not something that we haven't known about for a long time. It's super easy to find. Like the Romans knew about the vagus nerve because it's so large in the neck. Any anatomist will be like, what is this massive nerve doing just by itself going down into the body? There's probably something significant about it. And so they realized that. And how they realized it is like you're like, well, they don't know like medical science or any of these things, but it doesn't take a lot to understand the power of it, because there's a Roman anatomist named Galen, 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 in the Roman gladiator times, actually. And so what he would do is he would observe gladiators who were hurt, who were injured during battle. And in part of those battles, you would have like, I don't know, not to get graphic, but some kind of a slice to your neck or to your organ. And they go like, wow, when this happened, they would survive maybe for about a day or two. They'd report like, I'm having really bad gastrointestinal issues. It's like my stomach's not working anymore. And don't know. And then they would pass naturally because they didn't have like hospitals back then to what we have now. But they would go, okay, well, what happened when the knife went here? And they go, oh my God, this big nerve, they call it the vagus nerve. They're like, okay, that was severed. So they go, okay, well, there's probably some connection between this nerve and the function of the stomach and the intestines. Yes. And so they were able to make these correlations really simply.
And can you just, backing up, what the left vagus nerve does versus the right branch, if you could just elaborate on that a teeny bit more.
Yeah, so the left and right branch, they're all very similar. So they have a kind of a mirror image in terms of the organs that they connect to, but there does seem to be more of a correlation between the left nerve and the intestines and the stomach and the colon. And the right nerve seems to have more innervation with the heart and the lungs.
Got it.
They're kind of staggered in terms of, so right is heart, left is more stomach based.
Fantastic. Okay, can you speak a little bit about vagus nerve stimulation and kind of the different frequencies that you can use, from simple humming, meditation essential oils, to electrical stimulation and ultrasonic stimulation?
Yeah, so basically stimulation of the vagus nerve, as far as where I work with it in sort of a more medical technology basis, is really based on the treatment for epilepsy. So they found that if they did they did shocks to the vagus nerve, light electrical shocks, that you could actually reduce epileptic seizure fits.
Right, and depression. The FDA approved it.
And now more recently, because they found that people with the implants, the vagus nerve implants, they would do like a surgical implant, like a pacemaker, not to your heart, but to your vagus nerve. And people with epilepsy would have depression, may not get an improvement in the epilepsy, but they may be like, I don't feel depressed anymore. This is really amazing. And so then the FDA is like, okay, let's make this a depression treatment too. So there's massive amounts of research. Today, there's about 200,000 human beings walking around with these implants in their body. So, I mean, we have like this massive experiment real time going on in terms of real time stimulating the vagus nerve. So in terms of stimulating it, you don't have to get an implant. You don't have to go down to your doctor and shell out $16,000 to get this implant. So, and I don't encourage most people to do that unless they really have like epileptic fits, or if they do have major depressive disorder, maybe they can consider it. But there are tons of alternatives, and even people with the implants would tell you meditation is really helpful because it calms your mind. And I believe it reconnects your body, your brain stem with the ability to hear your vagus nerve. Yeah. Because your vagus nerve is always speaking to you. It's always sending signals up. And so if we're cutting off that part, we're disconnected from our body. And that creates a lot of like human psychoses, essentially. A lot of depression, a lot of anxiety. So meditation is huge. Breath work is another thing that, and if you can breathe in at a rate of like 5 seconds, but then breathe out at a rate of 8 seconds.
Right, it's the exhale.
Lower exhales activate your vagus nerve more. So that's really a good takeaway. Things like, I definitely think that smells, different sort of chemical compounds that really bring to mind a certain state. So you can create different mental states based on the smells and the chemicals that you're putting into your body. And so there's like natural things like lavender, there's different flower smells, different herbs, different spices essentially that can call back into your body different sort of electrical states, different mental states of relaxation. So
yeah,
like
it triggers the release of different chemicals and yeah,
exactly.
You down.
Exactly. And so you can start to create these like neural pathways where you're like, okay, this smell, this herb, this represents a certain state of mind. And so if you can like meditate alongside using essential oils, you can start to strengthen that connection where maybe you don't have time to do a full yoga session, but if you smell it, memory is super connected to smell. So just these, you can just call back in that state of mind, and your mind can regulate your vagus nerve for sure. Yes. So those are really powerful ways to just access it. And then there's lots of natural ways to do it. There's also things like electrical stimulation of the vagus nerve. And I would say that, shout out to Dr. Nemechek, Dr. Joseph Nemechek in Arizona. He did a lot of work on autonomic regulation using ear vagus nerve stimulation. So the auricular branch of the vagus nerve. And so he really pioneered that work. And so I think that's been very helpful and very informative. Now, in terms of like the frequencies that he uses, I mean, that's his own specific protocol. But yeah, I do think that there's some relationship to different frequencies that you put into the vagus nerve that can kind of tune it up or tune it down. Yeah.
And there's been a lot of research about like healthy frequencies, like frequencies of the planet, frequencies of different organ systems. It's almost like we have, like there's a natural range that things should fall in, and you can almost reboot things to factory settings with frequency, like sound, oils, color, your device.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And I think each person has a little bit of a different need.
Right.
So people are different there's high energy people, and then there's lower energy people. So you kind of want to figure out ways to match where people are to stimulate them. And then, there's like things like ultrasound, which is, definitely an emerging field, which is really, really extraordinary, because where electrical stimulation falls a little bit short, I mean, it's still great, but where it does fall short is that electricity loves to travel the shortest path to complete the cycle, to complete the circuit. So you have positive and negative electrodes, and the electricity goes, how do I get here as fast as possible? So if you put the vagus nerve right in the middle, the electricity will pass through it, which is good. But if the vagus nerve is deeper, like in the neck, it's really difficult to say, well, don't go over the skin, because it wants to go over your skin. It doesn't actually want to penetrate deeper into the muscle. And especially in the gut, You can't really get down to the gut with electrical stimulation very easily. So with things like ultrasound, what you can do is you can focus the waves directly to where you want it to go. And it won't stop until it hits like, something highly reflective like bones or anything like that. So yeah, ultrasound holds massive potential. It also allows you to do frequency dependent stimulation. So you can change the frequencies of it. And the targeting is really a key function of that. And also, it also takes a lot less time as well. So electrical stimulation, because it does activate pain receptors in certain cases, you can't use it at high intensities for much time. So you have to keep the intensity really low, which stretches out the time that you need to use it for the effective dose. But ultrasound isn't painful, so you can really use it for essentially a full dose for just a matter of minutes, rather than maybe an hour for electrical stimulation.
And is your device like the Rife machine and the FSM machine? It's kind of complicated. You need to know all the programs and things like this. Is your device pre-programmed and pretty specific? Is it made for the beginner, for like the novice?
Oh yeah, super beginner. You can learn it in about a minute.
Okay.
All pre-programmed, yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. And is it kind of like a laser? You just aim it?
Yeah, exactly. Like cold lasers, people do cold lasers or red light kind of flashlights and stuff. Yeah, it's super, super simple.
And how often and for what duration? Like 3 times a day for a couple minutes, or what do you have people do?
Yeah, I'd say it's about 5 to 10 minutes per day, left side, right side. Generally 1 to 2 times per day. Usually right before bed is really helpful because it does seem to really put people into a deep parasympathetic state, really relax them, which will make you tired. So, for people who just have a hard time calming down, it's really helpful for that.
Yeah, and what kind of, you have an entire Facebook group. What kind of conditions draw people to you? Like how do people, would it be an autoimmune diagnosis or gastrointestinal issues? What symptoms have you noticed that your device really helps with?
Yeah, well, I'd say like the thing that draws the people to the group the most is there's a ton of word of mouth. So it's really the people that are in there who are like, people having these huge revelations like, wow, I've been led around for years by my common practitioner who has just never mentioned the vagus nerve to them. And that there's so many things that are connected. Like how could you have like, heart murmurs, but also gastrointestinal issues? And there's never been really for them any kind of cohesive framework that explains how these things are related.
So symptom clusters that no one's kind of understanding how they all fit together.
Exactly. And then like, depression, how does that play into gastrointestinal issues? So it's really like the people that are in there attract more of themselves. And the common thing comes down to people who feel like they're unable to regulate their own nervous system, where they feel a little bit out of whack. They know that they feel out of whack, even though when they go to a doctor, they say, well, we did an x-ray, we did an MRI, we racked up tons of these medical bills doing tests, but you look fine to me. I don't see anything wrong. But there's no real good test for the vagus nerve. You can't extract it and like examine it.
Well, heart rate variability, but yeah.
Heart rate variability is good, but even then that doesn't fully explain the whole picture. But I love HRV for sure. It's a very effective way to measure it. What
symptom clusters, like if people are listening and they're like, gosh, I wonder if this is me. You mentioned kind of racing heart. What other things do people kind of present with?
Yeah, I'd say gastrointestinal issues are very, very big issues. So decreased gut motility.
Which would be like SIBO or IBS.
Yeah, like SIBO related or IBS or Candida. These kinds of people who are like believing that there is some kind of an attack on their system from the inside out, through the gut lining, like so bacterial overgrowth. Then there's also just cases where somebody believes that because of a mental trauma, a past trauma in their life that caused their vagus nerve to shut down. Yeah. And they haven't been able to make a full picture of how those are related. So trauma can definitely send your body into a state of shutdown, and that can shut down your vagus nerve, which then shuts down crucial automatic processes. So it means that your stomach isn't producing gastric acid. So you get acid reflux because of that. Then you also eat food and you don't digest it. A lot of people have to rely on, external methods to do what normal people do in terms of gastrointestinal function. Yeah. So that's very uncomfortable. And I'd say those are really common. And then also things with like anxiety, depression, self-talk, these kinds of things. I've definitely seen a big relationship between that. And another one that was really presented to me that was really strange was like period issues. So like the menses. So we had a lot of women in 3 years ago when we started, it's honestly, I think autonomic disorders affect women so much more than men. It's a lot more women are coming to this group to find out about the vagus nerve. Maybe it's also because men are really stubborn and like, I don't need anyone to tell me what to do. So maybe that's what it is too.
Right.
But I definitely think that it does kind of unfairly impact women a lot more than men. I think that's because women have probably a much more developed vagus nerve as well. They have the capacity to become more empathetic and more compassionate, and also because of the reproductive organs in women are much more important. Essentially, I'd say much more developed, much more robust.
I think it has to do with the gallbladder and how the vagus nerve innervates the gallbladder, and after pregnancy, the gallbladder becomes sluggish, and so the hormones aren't eliminated, and so they're and so you feel the symptoms much more intensely. Like men don't get hot flashes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally. So we started having these reports because we weren't looking at this initially. It was just like, are you like depression, these kinds of things, gastrointestinal issues. But then we'd have a lot of women who are like, wow, I used to get really nauseous before my period, but they're like, now I don't get nauseous at all. Like I'm not vomiting.
Well, that's the gallbladder. When you have nausea, it's the gallbladder. And so what you've done is you've activated the vagus nerve, and so the gallbladder could function properly. And so, yeah.
Yeah, it's super wild. So that was one of the ones that was like, okay, that was one that I wasn't entirely expecting to shift. So it's a lot of stuff. I mean, you just look at like a map of where the vagus nerve connects in the body and like, okay, I have issues here. You should absolutely be asking yourself, could this be related to the vagus nerve not functioning properly? And then go from there and start to trying to answer those questions. And you might actually find that you have a huge insight. Like, oh my God, this makes way more sense than what I've been told.
I always equate it to trying to bike uphill in the highest gear. Like your body's just stuck in the wrong gear and it makes everything harder. If you can just downshift, all of a sudden it's super easy. Yeah. So just helping people to shift gears. And I love that your device is an easy way for people to do that. Is there anything else that we haven't talked about that you'd like to share?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of a few areas that people don't particularly explore when they're going down this road, the rabbit hole, just to give people a sense of these are categories that I often see which go unaddressed in a vagus nerve journey, even if they go, okay, I think that there's a problem with the vagus nerve. And they oftentimes are told that, because we live in a very device-centric world. I see ads on Instagram all the time, buy this device, it's going to change your life, blah, 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 blah. And I come from that world of transformative technology and, there's a device to solve any problem.
Right.
But I kind of, because I lived in China, so I got to see the development of these things on the back end. I know a lot of these people, I love them. But if you look at the devices that are smart, that are connected to the internet, the ones that claim all these things, they have a use rate of about 2 weeks and then they get thrown in a drawer. And you'd be lucky if you bought a really expensive device and used it for more than a month, because there's not a lot of thinking in terms of habit forming, lifestyle changes, right? Success comes from consistency. It doesn't come from just buying a device and then using it a few times.
Yeah, it's frequency and duration. Yeah.
Yeah, frequency and duration. And so you have to be thinking in terms of how are you going to get something that people are going to use long term for their health. And that comes down to psychological engineering of your own habits and rituals. And so that is really important. And there's a big lifestyle shift that people need to make, because you're not just going to go and buy the new device. You're not just going to go get the new supplement, the new pill.
Yeah,
And
it's
that's
not
gonna be
one
it.
and done. It's
It's not a one and
shifting
done
gears.
thing.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that takes just a consistent habit. It's
Yeah.
whatever you find that can allow you to get into that, that's and sticking with it too. And not shifting like this or this or this, sticking with one thing and trying that out, really seeing it fully through. I'd say
Yeah.
90 days is about a good amount of time to make sure that you're seeing things through, giving things the opportunity to really work, right? Some of these things can work pretty fast. Like, you know, when you stimulate your vagus nerve, you can notice some shifts pretty fast. In
Some
cases.
people that are constipated, it's like, boom, they have a bowel movement. You know,
Exactly.
yeah, it can be immediate.
Can be immediate. But then there's also the reconnection between the brain and the body. And sometimes that's the growth of nerves as well. So you have to factor that in. And then one of the other really underexplored areas, and I know this because I was in a car accident in 2016 and also in 2010. So I've had to go through physical therapy a lot. And the atlas bone in your neck is very, very underexplored in terms of, you know, if it deviates, if it tilts, it can start to pinch your vagus nerve right in your neck and actually also cut off blood flow to your brain. So you can get like brain fog and all these kinds of things. So looking at the C1 vertebra is really, really important in this journey.
Well, and
right?
I go to an Atlas orthogonal chiropractor, and they're totally talking about vagus nerve. But it's interesting, we had Dr. Robert Melillo on here, and he was talking about all of like autism, ADD, all of these things are left brain overactivation. So I was asking my chiropractor about that. He said you can even see like most people tilt a little bit to the right, like it's subtle, but that's kind of, you know, the right brain is trying to get more action. And so activating the vagus nerve can also help to kind of balance the two hemispheres of the brain. And yeah.
I love Atlas orthogonal. I got my mother was like, I heard about this, we're going. I was like, I don't want to go. And then I went and was like, this is amazing. So I definitely recommend that kind of work as well.
It's amazing. Well, it was a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you so much
for
taking the time to join us.
I appreciate it.